Welcome to the third season of Afros and Audio's interview series, Heard. My guest today is Khary Frazier. Welcome, man. It's great to talk to you.
Peace be. What's going on?
Man, it's cold, it's winter.
Statement.
Those things happen at the same
Yeah.
time. So
Mhm.
it's
Yeah,
nothing
yeah.
new. But yeah, man, want to chat with you about your work in podcasting. And of course, Detroit is different.
Thank
So,
you.
what inspired you to start Detroit is Different in 2014? And how has the podcast evolved since its inception?
All right. So 2014, we have to remember that was an era where people were like, what the hell is a podcast? And I was one of those few people that probably started picking up podcasts in 2010 while going to community college. It was some good information just to sit and study through, or if I just be on campus, I could just dive into a contest deeper and like it keep my attention. So I like the long form conversation and no breaks in continuity, because I believe as much as like my mom was into talk radio when I was a kid, I just hated the fact that like it would break the continuity to go to the callers, talk about the weather, talk about the traffic. I feel like I really couldn't get the depth of the conversation. So I've always really started falling in love with long form content, even as a child, which I didn't even know what that was then. But in 2014, we come to life of, okay, I want a platform where I can talk about my music a little bit more. And I was getting into all these soapbox debates about the Detroit that I know, meaning that a lot of times the discussions I was having with people inside of the city, they'd say, I don't like this in Detroit, and I don't like that in Detroit, and this is what's bad in Detroit, and this is really a post bankruptcy Detroit that we're looking at. And I'm like, no, the Detroit that I know is so different than what you're speaking of. This is just such a cliquish town. You just don't know about all of these different influences that exist in the city of Detroit. You're not aware of it because you are only associating around the same people. So it started from the concept of introducing a lot of the Detroiters that I know to the other Detroiters I know. So that's the people in fashion, the people in comedy, the people in community work, the people in politics, the people that write policy in politics, like all these different people in the way they kind of intersect and interact and build different things. So that was the start. And it even opens with Baba Malik Yakini, that right now it's like a championship lap that he's running, in the sense of being one of the founders of Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network. And that work building the Detroit People's Food Co-op, which just broke ground and opened this year, 2024. A lot of victories there. And then my very next guest is Phil Cooley, that did Slow's Barbecue. And this white guy comes to the city, a model that left New York, comes back to Detroit, and he builds this barbecue place that like becomes a sign definitely of a lot of gentrification, but also a whole lot of ways to like revitalize and bring people back to a community that was down the street from where Tiger Stadium left years ago. Detroit is Different is rooted in these stories that a lot of people don't know. I mean, Sharon McPhail in my first season is the black woman that ran for mayor after Coleman Young, and uh, came very close to becoming mayor, and just her telling her story. Like, that's season one. So I'm introducing these dynamic stories. And those first interviews were so beautiful because even the people I was interviewing were like, what the hell is a podcast? I just do it for you, Khary. And I don't know, in retrospect, looking back, if I'd even be able to get some of those interviews early on. And that was the start. Where it exists now, into video, into other people connecting to Detroit is Different as a network and providing platform for them. People like Piper Carter and so many others, comedian Josh Adams, and the My Natural Hair Show podcast. It's become an idea of introduction to a whole platform to how I do business, how I see life, and it's expanded so much of my personal network and social capital in the ways that people kind of see me as a resource because of the gateway of Detroit is Different.
Man, that was a lot in a super dope way
Thank you.
because you're a veteran in this space. And maybe it's just me projecting, but around 2016, 2017, you feel like, okay, you've been around for a while. But 2010, 2012, that's
Yeah.
serious. That's blog talk radio, uploading your audio to a website or to a platform that's not Apple, Spotify,
Yeah.
Stitcher, all of that. That's ground roots that you're talking about.
I mean, the ways of like finding this early on, just from long form conversation, I'd look at most people that started in this space definitely had to be connected to radio or music production. And I had some roots kind of connected to both. And a lot of what I loved about this and still love about it is the free form of it, because radio was something that I went to high school for. I don't know if people are familiar with like vocational schools and everything, but the vocational discipline of broadcast radio was something I took up my senior year of high school. So I learned a lot in radio. Now, back from the lens of the reason I'm in radio is just because this is the closest thing to rap production, and hip hop is really where my mind was set. So this is close to hip hop and I can learn some things here. With that, some of those skill sets in reading copy and learning drops and doing the production and understanding how to produce a show and what a role of a producer is. You pick this stuff up. As much as I definitely didn't really respect the craft as much as many, because I was thinking about music production. And then on the flip side of music production, just knowing how to put these shows together. I believe a lot of people early on, like with Detroit is Different, starting in 2014 and the other iterations where I was thinking about it and doing these long form discussions and figuring out how to interact with it, it is that internet radio, blog talk. It is, putting it on a CD and then passing it out to people like, listen to this conversation that I had. It really is not the distribution network that a lot of people have access to now. So looking at the way that the space has changed from what is a podcast to why do you podcast to you can't make no money doing that to now it's like, hey, I'm thinking about starting a podcast. So I was thinking that you could come in and consult with me. And it just throws me off to just see the growth in this, as I still really feel that in a lot of ways this is television before everyone had access to it, because even to this day, I believe a lot of content creation is more arced in the sense of like the 90-second TikTok video, not the long form content like what we're doing, because exploring and diving deeper into this content of podcasting is so many more horizons I see in the future.
Yeah, man, and you've been here for it. You've been here for the journey of podcasting, evolution of it, and we're still not where it's going to land. I'm curious, are you seasonal or how do you format your podcast?
All right, so now we get into I'm still learning myself.
Okay.
So I am oh man, I wish I was seasonal. Like what I tell people, a lot of the lessons I know as I'm going to do some new shows myself about what I've done. I've done so many things, quote unquote, the wrong way. And I shouldn't say wrong, but I've done a lot of things in a way I would not advise anybody to do. First off, the schedule is based on when I can book a guest, when I have time to get things edited, and when I can post. So it's all over the place. I'm looking at the archives like, okay, I really need to start putting this into like seasonal formats, because I just finished episode 400 not too long ago with comedian Howie Bell. Shout out to Howie Bell. And of those 400 episodes, some years is not that many episodes, and then other years it's a whole bunch of episodes in the 10-year journey since 2014. So I am one of those people that really turns on the mic and gets going as I feel like it,
Yeah.
which is definitely not the best way to build that relationship with audience. The best way to build that relationship with audience is to be consistent, be something that a person can rely on, because the functionality of it really comes too. The people that are studying like how I was studying, or sometimes when I'm editing video and those certain tasks, I'll throw on a long form content podcast and it just helps me push all the way through. Or before people go to bed, like people check out a podcast, like it's nighttime reading nowadays.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
people really rely on that. The other thing I do that is unlike a lot of podcasts is I interview all types of people, meaning that I can interview the street comedian episode 395 and then interview the pastor episode 396 and then interview the midwife 397. I'm really connected to people's Detroit stories, which becomes more of an archival project than the type of experience where it's niched and nuanced. It's really a discussion about people's personal, intimate story of Detroit. And I don't even have really a guideline. It's really where the conversation goes.
First of all, congratulations on 400. That's major.
Thank you.
Super major. 10 years, major.
Mhm.
So while you may have done some things wrong according
Yeah.
to who and what standard, right?
Yes.
I think podcasting allows us to go against status quo, allows
Yeah.
us to create our own modeling for what it looks like, how it feels. And it is, to me, creator's choice in a lot of ways because there's still success with even how you've done it over this 10-year span. And I think that matters because it provides this creative liberation that other mediums or platforms don't really allow for. This is your platform. At the end of the day, Detroit is different, is yours. So I really think that it's important because other podcasters, aspiring, even people who have been working at this for a while, sometimes we try to stick to some form of a model that doesn't even work for us. You've done it in a way that's worked for you and your lifestyle. We always working to improve and do things
Mhm.
different and better. But you've done it in a way that worked for you, and that is important.
Thank you. And I definitely agree with that. Being the barometer of my own success is very key in a lot of this, and it has to fit into life. So, because I'm an entrepreneur, and a lot of the entrepreneurship really has grown from the podcast. So much of this is the modeling behavior of people like, yo, can you do that for me? And it's opened up opportunities where now staff exists. I'm coming to the Afros and Audio conference and building more of a relationship with Miles and Q that are here in the city of Detroit as well. The journey of podcasting, in a lot of ways, is a passion project that has created so many more opportunities than where the passion was in the beginning. I think for somebody like me, the passion still exists. So when I speak of that barometer of success, I'm speaking really from so many people that come to me that are looking to podcast here inside Detroit's different studios as thinking that success is that metric of building an audience, monetizing that audience, and looking really to have a voice in spaces and places and become, here's the word, a tastemaker in
Mhm.
whatever they want to be a subject matter expert in.
Yeah.
And Detroit is different being such a personal narrative based show about different people's Detroit stories. It does not necessarily have such a niche and nuance as I'm really big on niche and nuance is one of those key gateways when I talk to other content creators of like making that connection because the niche and nuance is so macro because of the collection of the different types of people I've interviewed, whether that be people that are visiting Detroit or people that live in Detroit or people that have moved to Detroit, people that have been here their whole life. And that's the other beauty of having such an archive. Like I've interviewed Andrew Yang before, and it was at this conference, Tech Economy, and when he was running for president, so many people were tapping into that interview. It just threw me off, and I was like, I forgot I interviewed Andrew Yang. I was like, oh yeah, I did interview Andrew Yang. You know, at this Tech Economy conference in Detroit, and we were talking about just Detroit questions as at that time Detroit was looking like a model based behavior of what you could do looking at a tech based industry developing what a city from quote unquote ruins. And I'm speaking from the lens of the bedrock properties, or I guess Quicken Loans, or the, as you know, Detroiters will call it, like the Dan Gilbert enterprise that put on this conference and executed different things like that. And he was a part of coming in, and many other people too. I mean, I was more fascinated with interviewing the technology information specialist for Mexico City, Andrew Yang, but so be it.
Yeah.
Interviews can be really like that with this content.
I love that you said twice now this archive. And I
Mhm.
do believe that podcasting allows a space for anyone to grab a mic, lay down their stories, their record of living, of existing. And so, even with all of these different types of people, backgrounds, ambitions, vocations that you're doing, it's still that central theme of Detroit.
Mhm. Yeah, and as you talk about even that archiving, I'm a big fan of old magazines. So I collect old magazines, especially old black magazines like Old Jets, Ebony's
Mhm,
Essence, even Crises magazines, or really get a kick out of Black Enterprise. It's a snapshot in time. I'm
mhm.
sure you've done this before. Like you've interviewed a person in 2019 and then you interview them in 2025. Definitely the semblance of who they are exists, and it's just what it is. But what they're doing and how they look at it and how they see and just the layers that come together with it just adds so much more perspective. And putting those pieces together, as much as I think like AI bots is probably grabbing a lot of Detroit's different things and probably going to regurgitate some of it, but the sincerity of what exists from these experiences and what is being archived, I believe will have value in people really having a rich understanding for what Detroit is different is, because that's really the root of how I even describe it. I believe that you can approach this shit in two ways. And excuse my French.
You're good. We adults, both of us.
Okay. So, all right,
Yes.
you can approach it with rich content. And I often tell every podcaster that comes onto the network, the rich content has so much value if you tap into it. I look at like broadcast radio. Me and you could tomorrow with our experience take over the top slot for I don't know, New York or LA radio morning, and we're going to get millions of listeners by default. But they're looking to reach a lot of people. So the topics we talk about will be very curated and set up for a way for it to reach people. But the rich content, we're really having an intimate relationship with that listener. And that intimate relationship, that's the value. And that value could be monetized directly through commercials, or that value could be monetized in so many different ways or actualized in different ways. The relationships that you can gather. I believe if I can deliver the best interview to somebody for them, that connection has kept like some I don't even want to say friendships, but like relationships and bonds that just exist beyond measure for certain people, where they come back and they say, "Yo, man, you gave me my favorite interview.
Yeah.
You gave me something that's so unique and that's just deeply rich." And I share that with this example to make it more practical. I love giving different examples so people can grasp it more. And I often tell people that usually you check into a hotel, especially back in the day, it's not that many television stations for when you check into a hotel, like back in the day, the pre-Netflix era. Most hotels, even sometimes the shittiest of hotels, all have the golf network. And people are like, why would the golf network exist? My cousin used to flip out because they never had BET at any of the hotels where we had the family reunion. And I don't think I've ever seen BET in a hotel outside of DC personally, but that was his own thing. But it's the possibility of who watches the golf network. Hotel chains have invested in the thought process of the person watching the golf network, whether whatever they doing, you know what I'm saying? Whether they need to get off the road for a second because they, just need the break, or whether they, stepping out on a person, or whether they, getting high or whatever. The thought process is we want to have the golf network available for whoever checks in this hotel because it's the richness of it. And in podcasting, the analogy I always say is I don't know anything about yachting and I don't know anything about boating. But if you and I started a podcast called Tying Knots on Yachts, meaning you got to anchor the yacht, and we did it for 2 years and we only had 100 listeners, we may be able to sell a commercial for $20,000 because the thought process is who is the people that are listening to the yacht podcast. And I
Mhm.
really learned this because some of the most successful content creators I know are into very niche and specific things like gadgetry, model trains, dials, and things like that. They are the people that have grown interesting audiences, but it's also their personalities and their take towards it.
Mhm.
And that doesn't necessarily mean you should do it that way. But if you're looking to seek the value in this, it's not necessarily always thinking to yourself, let me be Joe Buttons and talking about what celebrity gossip exists and be in a sea of everyone talking about celebrity gossip. Just stick to really what's sincerely where you're at. This Detroit is Different project is unique because I don't know anything like it.
What's been some of the most surprising or rewarding parts of sharing Detroit's culture and historical narratives with your audience?
And surprising things are over the years, because I usually always start the interviews with, how did you come to Detroit? So, with that and interviewing so many Black folks, I've really started developing a better understanding of the great migration patterns and the relationships, not just to Georgia and Alabama, is where most Black folks from Detroit seem to come,
Mm,
but understanding those patterns, the neighborhoods that they will come to in Detroit, the way that they would find friends, and understanding those roots. It's like from down south, usually escaping racism, which, you stumbling over that, and coming up north, you're not necessarily all the way escaping it, but it's more opportunity here to maneuver around racism at the time. And really connecting to other families through churches, connecting through other neighborhoods. And unlike a lot of the historians I know that are very academic and looking for records, I'm gathering so many of these oral histories where I can like layer different discussions. So it's really cool that, I interviewed the nephew of Elijah Muhammad last year, and he's talking about the roots and the starts of the Nation of Islam. And that starts in a historically Black district of Black Bottom Detroit off Hastings Street. That's the origin of the Nation of Islam through Fard Muhammad. As Fard Muhammad is there and his family's there. So now knowing that his family roots come from Georgia, I'm having an understanding even of that neighborhood and connecting to these Black Georgians in the root of how the Nation of Islam starts.
mhm.
And that's running concurrent with all these other Black families that are like kind of in that same mix. And I kind of have an understanding of like, oh, okay. So if they're in this space and those people are in that space, they move from that part of Detroit that is demolished because urban renewal kind of went through all the Black business districts, and Black folks kind of pattern and move to different communities, which places the second original mosque of the Nation of Islam, because first it was the Temple of Islam, in my neighborhood, like in Linwood. And that same Linwood neighborhood is like right across the street from where the rebellion or the riots of 1967 take place.
Mm,
Next door to Goal, which is the Milton Henry organization that becomes the Republic of New Africa. Down the street from New Bethel Baptist Church, where Aretha Franklin and them were. Down the street from Motown Records. So I'm starting to like really gather the context of a lot of this, because historians kind of take out the story but don't put the context of all the other things happening around usually. And I'm getting that from all these different oral traditions and histories. So you can tell me a Detroit story, and now I have like 10 years worth of other Detroit stories to kind of mix and match to say, oh, well, this was probably happening there. You were probably at this skate rink. You probably grew up like in this ice cream shop. You probably had to run away from this neighborhood gang and things like that.
yeah.
It's really unique.
Wow, man. That's real. And the aspect of truly understanding what's happening. You are understanding Detroit on a level that can't be picked up in a textbook, because most people outside of Detroit, we have these, quite frankly, narratives of Detroit, right? I've been to Detroit one time years ago for a college tour, going through Detroit, picking up
Mhm.
kids as we were going down south
Okay.
from DC. And
Uh-huh.
it's those things where it's just like you're looking at the church's chicken and it's looking bad, and you know what neighborhood you're in and all that
Mhm.
sort of thing. But you don't know
Yeah.
shit about Detroit
Mhm.
until you listen to people who live there all their lives, people who have experienced it for more than a year, 2 years, 10 years, who really understand what has happened inside of certain neighborhoods, why it happened, what happened as a result of it. This is all like so golden for a city that truly gets a bad rap from outsiders looking in.
Oh, most definitely. And the layers, I believe in variance the older I get. So it's, especially a great lie has truth in it. So I know that even in saying that, people are like, what the hell are you talking about? A great lie has truth in
Oh
it. I
yeah.
have to give you some truth. So I believe in variance in whatever is said. And It's like a prism. And through podcasting, I believe I can shine lights on different parts of that prism. Because some of the things that they're saying, it is true.
Oh yeah.
If you look to the street industry, like Detroit, Black Mafia family starts here, Motown starts here, the Nation of Islam starts here. So it's these different arcs of like different parts of the Black experience. The reality is, you go to the right family reunion, it's somebody in all three of them,
Oh yeah.
you know, and different segments of where those paths went and how those paths went, and understanding what really happened here in the city of Detroit and why it happened contextualizes a different experience that is the Detroit story, but I also see this as the Baltimore story. It's the
Mhm.
Cleveland story. It is the Gary, Indiana story. It's the Chicago story. It's so
Sure.
many other cities and really communities of Blackness where this experience is full throttle, very similar. Pittsburgh, Charlotte, like this
Durham.
experience of what we're talking
Yeah.
about of divestment in Black communities where Black leadership assumes positions. This is just a common American story, because my belief in America, and I often say this in most podcasts, is that America is designed for white men with businesses and property. So not even all white men. And for America to function outside of that scope, so the further you get away from that, it's like putting water in the antifreeze tank. Will the car move? Yes, but you got to be mindful that it's water in the antifreeze tank. This is designed for that.
Mhm.
And under that same premise, to reset the whole structure of this, being that quote unquote laws are built off precedent, stolen land, stolen labor, and a stolen loan. So, what we're doing in the Black community is our creativity and our social capital and the way we approach this through what we're facing is brilliance. And
Yes, it
that's what
is.
creates so much of this stuff
Mm.
being so cool. And really the brand of what I say in Detroit is, if you take Detroit away from Michigan, this is Idaho. And I believe the same thing with America. If you took Black people away from America, then this is Norway.
Yeah. It's real, and the resourcefulness, the kinship,
Mhm.
the innovation. We've got to be super innovative in our
Yeah.
communities. I really am enjoying this conversation. It brings so much to light outside of public policy and all this sort of thing. It humanizes Detroit. It humanizes
Yeah.
what the experiences have been versus case studies. I always say underserved, underrepresented, they're not just terms, they're actual experiences. Concentrated poverty is an experience. It's not just something that you find in a book. And
Yeah.
so, for your platform to really highlight and amplify these stories, I wish so many more folks decided that their city matters enough to really get into it and have whole conversations with the people that make the shit happen. Like you said, if you take them out of the city, then what?
And also, it's taking willingness for me to open up and see the lens too. And I tip my hat to anybody that's listening. And as I assume a lot of content creators and podcasters are listening, sometimes takes the risk of interviewing that person you don't want to interview, for multiple reasons in the 10 plus years of doing this. Because one, that person's really going to value the experience usually. Two, it's going to challenge you to dig deeper and really get into that discussion. Three, it's going to only add more of a perspective for your prism to see things. Some of those toughest interviews, and I got a couple coming up now where it's like, oh man, here we go. That's really like the digging deep where it's like, okay, I'm going to pull something different from this. How can I reframe it? How can I bring something to life? And that is when I listen to a lot of other place centered content, I can tell like it's a through line of a narrative of who they're talking to, but it's a lot of people they're not talking to. And I just believe in that balance. Sometimes you got to talk to the person that supports gentrification to get a better understanding of the perspective of the story,
Mhm.
as it adds balance to it, and not get them on the podcast and like beat them up, but really just get into the whole concept of like, okay, how do you see this adding to a community with already suppressed resources and you're extracting more, as opposed, how do you see that as benefiting things?
Yeah.
Like, explain the trickle down economics and how it works from
Hmm.
a real sincere place. And that has been some of the largest growth I've had in this podcast. And speaking of over the years, it's such a black city. Like, for years, we only had like one city council member that was white. One was very beloved through the city of Detroit. One was not that beloved in the city of Detroit. So Mary Mann Mahaffey was very beloved. And Sheila Cockrell was not as beloved of like black community. And my interview with Sheila Cockrell was still one of my most fascinating interviews, I personally think. And there was a lot of people that's like, oh man, you a sellout. Why you interviewing her? And da da da. I'm like, because this story is a part of the story. To exclude it and dismiss it, I think we're not honoring what the full picture is, to have a context of how this happens, how she sees, okay, with downtown business development, that's going to empower communities because communities had opportunities to empower themselves, but did not seize it the way that these businesses can seize and take advantage of what's in place for it. So some of this stuff needs to exist. My key argument is a lot of these businesses haven't done the same
Hmm.
either, but
Hmm.
some of the businesses are closer to gateways of doing that than some of the community efforts that have been that, just because of other connections in education and idea of value and idea of resourcefulness, as the concept for many people is, when I get something, I want to leave Detroit and then come back and quote unquote give back to Detroit, not necessarily seeing the kinship of the thriving Detroit is a thriving quality of life for me and my family.
Hmm. Hmm. And I think it's so important that you mention taking risk. I can imagine that you've evolved as a human,
Yeah.
perspective, knowledge, and even interview style in deciding what stories to tell on your platform. It expands the worldview. And anything where your worldview has been expanded, you're going to improve. That's just how it works, right? And
Yeah.
so I say all that because I think it is important. The National Association of Black Journalists, they took a lot of flack last year for having that person on.
That
And
was one of the time out. That was one of the funniest moments of last
yeah,
year of a very chaotic year.
yes,
But
yes, yes. And I watched the full thing, and yes,
I
there was some, let's move on. Anyway, the risk to do this is what's happening in the world. We cannot
mhm,
pretend, we can't play around with it, we can't ignore it. And the more we choose to just really be horse blinders on, that doesn't support us as a whole, as a collective. And so, even though I still think fuck that and fuck him,
yeah.
it was whatever decision was made that was by a person that had the same idea as you. No, this conversation, needs to be had, period.
And I believe that, because that's been one of the pressing issues, even though he's leaving now. For the past 12 years, Detroit has had a white mayor. So a lot of this turnaround looks and coincides as like black leadership corrupt and unorganized and ineffective, white leadership amazing. And the shadows, really, I think on a national scale, is people look at Mayor Kilpatrick, and Mayor Kilpatrick, or I don't like when people even call him Kwame, which I think is another just way of people
Disrespect.
disrespecting him.
Yeah.
Mayor Kilpatrick, or Kwame, if people want to say that, is looked at as he was a thief and he was cheating on his wife and he was doing all of this. And I was like, okay. Mayor Duggan has had an FBI investigation about how certain contracts were given, had a larger, I believe, salacious incident with the affair that he had, being that he ended up marrying that woman and he had people from his staff actually supporting her nonprofit agency while she was a mistress. And these are just known facts, but
Mhm.
media doesn't paint the picture in that way.
Yeah.
And it's many stories to even tell from the Mayor Kilpatrick reign of, this young black man stepping into leadership from this family connected to a power institution of the Shrine of Black Madonna. His mother is a sitting congressperson. His father has been an advisor for county executives and working with Mayor Coleman Young at the time. Like, it's like a very rich story that leads to this history of Mayor Kilpatrick.
Yeah.
Brings the Super Bowl to the city, brings a Final Four to the city, and it's like, oh, look at him.
We summarized his whole life
A-
and his own career into one.
and and really unpacking what happens in the layers
Mm,
that always exist back
yeah.
to like black leadership in a position will not only get less resources, but doing quote unquote the same thing that the white guy does is different.
Yeah, I grew up under Mayor, Marion Barry, so I get it.
Oh man.
In
And
DC, so, yeah, I get
yeah,
it, and don't nobody never say nothing bad about Marion Barry in my presence.
and I think Marion Barry, I look to like when we look at these cities, these chocolate cities. So like Marion Barry, we look to even Willie Brown in San Francisco. We look to Mary Baraka. We look to Coleman Young here. Like it's a certain arc of what they were facing. But Marion Barry, like Coleman Young, to me, has such a strong relationship with the people.
Oh, man, he's the
And
people's
if you
mayor.
pour into those people,
Yeah.
like not just from the documentary that I like, but the people that I know. So it's like, that's our guy. He's helped people. He's
Mhm.
given them opportunities. So the relationship and reciprocity between the community and Marion Barry, and that breaks in some of where we look at things. I think sometimes how we look at what becomes resourceful. Hence, that's why the archiving and us telling our own history in their own context can really empower people so they understand that the decisions being made, though they may not have reached the outcome of what we look at as, I guess, quote unquote success, we have to understand why those decisions were being made.
Mm.
The piece I just finished editing, and it's phenomenal, from Dr. Nimhart. Dr. Nimhart done a lot of stories on cooperatives as I work with the cooperative here often. And she gave a lecture in the summer, and I'm capturing that story. And she's talking about Fannie Lou Hamer and the cooperatives that they developed that quote unquote lasted only for about 5 years, but the lessons learned from those co-ops, to not just dismiss it as, oh, this was a failure. You have to add layer and context to have an understanding of the values that were instilled in a lot of those people in Mississippi and what they were facing and how they looked at that. And keeping up concepts like pig banking, like you give a person a pig, and then from that pig, they get other piglets, and then they can, slaughter the piglets and kind of keep things moving. And now you got ways to share in community of
Mhm,
resources. So
mhm.
concepts like that carry on. So we
Yeah,
need to not look at this as so much of a zero sum game. We need to look at this as community empowerment. So
yeah.
now I'm on that soapbox, but this is
Listen,
still
I was thinking I'm geeking out over you right now because this stuff is something that I could tell we could go. This stuff is so intriguing and important because a lot of people across generations, we don't recognize how deliberate these systemic issues are. And
Mhm.
we look at ourselves as like, well, how did my family fuck this up so bad? Why are
Yeah.
we in concentrated poverty? And we don't realize that, well, when your grandmom and your great grandmom had the funds to buy in another neighborhood, they weren't allowed. They said, we got this tall building over here where you can go into, or other predatory things that occurred. And so we don't recognize the deliberateness of our station, our circumstances, our conditions. And so that's why it's so important to have these conversations, to archive them, to tell them over and over again, because we are a society of forgetfulness and erasure. And that, like I said, I'm gonna move on because I have to. You and I will talk.
I
This will
love
be
it.
a
I
4 hour
love it.
conversation.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
talked about this a bit already, but I want to give you an opportunity because you have described Detroit is different as more than a media platform. It's a
Yeah.
movement. So, how do you define that movement, and what does it mean to you?
So Detroit is different. Like I say, it starts as a podcast. Now it's a nonprofit organization, and Detroit is different. Community Group is a nonprofit, but Detroit is different. Inc. is also a business as well. My thought process is if Ford can have a foundation and a company, Detroit is different can too. And it's healing community through culture with media and events. So what's needed, I believe, is a place and space for us to come together. a place and space for us to connect. So that movement is building that. The Collard Green Cookoff is something started in 2023 that like has like captured the hearts and minds of so many Detroiters, where it's such a shared resource now that is a Detroit is different initiative that really has become something that is now looking like it's going to go to other places, but it is signature to what I believe the movement of Detroit is different. It's about creativity and social capital. How do we tap into our creativity and our social capital and tie into like those Black experiences that are like a through line in Blackness? And even the story of the collard green itself. This was a plant that was hidden inside the hair, locks, and braids of a lot of the people that were captured off the coast and brought here from West Africa and planted. And a lot of white America, definitely during enslavement and beyond, looked at it like it was a weed. So they never saw value in the collard green. But we love that collard green. We get competitive about the collard green. So we have a competition of who makes the best collard greens. And it brought out community in a way that it really flips things on the head through that competitive spirit and that dynamic. Like, you know, to watch grandma sit in the front row and look at it as it's a competitive as like a boxing match or a basketball game. So it's that creativity, it's that essence of like building something where now we can come together. We can get everybody in the room and we can be in that space. Now I can drop some more knowledge on you. From that more knowledge on you, we can expand and we can't just be so fixated on these niche and nuances, ideas of what the Black experience is, but we can connect around Blackness, agree to disagree where we need to, but we also have a center where it's like, okay, this is home where we can all connect. And that's what Detroit is different is really the movement for. Because if it's anything that I believe segments and hurts Detroit, it is the isolation of so many that feel as though I don't like him or her because I don't know, they go to this school or they have this diet or they have this religion or they listen to this artist. You know what I'm saying? Like Drake and Kendrick Lamar, that whole feud caused a lot more static in our community than it needed to. Whereas it's like, let's have that place and space where we can have definitely a passionate discussion about where we stand on things, but at the end of the day, all throw on Luther Vandross and be cool.
Yeah, yeah, man. It's that opportunity for connection, community, collaboration, and forward movement, which is the
Yeah,
most important part about it. Of course, there's past and there's history that informs how people think and their narratives and where they go in Detroit. But bringing together folks in that way, from the podcast, listening to these different stories to events like Collard Green Cookoff, which I think is just super dope and would love to
thank
attend.
you.
Yeah, it's important because this is at the end of the day, you talked about how audio, just listening to things before television became a thing, right?
Mhm.
This form of community is what we've always done, is what we know how to do. It's just got lost in the sauce in a lot of ways. And so I respect that you had the mind, you had the download to say, I know what to do and I know how to do it. And I'm going to learn as I go as well, because that's a thing.
Yeah.
But create what's coming to you, man. And that's something that so many people, that failure to launch, man, is like the idea is there, but the execution or the fear is bigger.
And I'm gonna say this because we can be so in our own heads with so much of that creativity. And a lot of the roots of this, as I'm uplifting, start from people that were connected to broadcast or connected to music, which in both arcs, you can be in your own head big time too, but still have that willingness for creativity. I believe that this is a great time. And I'm almost beating myself up because this 2024 was my first year coming to the Afros and Audio conference. And Q was right. I was like, damn, I should have been here the whole time through. And I don't ever want to miss it again. Cause right now, more than ever, I feel like people are not connecting to what I consider mainstream media. So they're looking for different outlets to interpret and grab on to things. So through Afros and Audio, it's a platform to connect with people across the nation that are telling these stories, to add more nuance, get more niche, get more information where something like this can be larger. One of the other cool things we do is we've been doing State of Black Detroit now for 4 years. And I eventually want to see, like, okay, let's see if we can get a State of Black Baltimore, Oakland, Charlotte, uh, New York, LA. And then we really are telling our own stories and getting a better understanding, not to dismiss the arc of everything, like, what black press has been, but black press has really become an arc of a story that at one point in time stood in a different ground, really more connected in a lot of ways to a corporate institution, and not, I think, in the strand of that independent voice. Is a lot of the black press is looking at a lot of stuff like this to make other connections and intimate connections with people. So I really see this as a time and a moment in space where so much can be richly poured into if we execute in
Hmm.
that. Now,
Hmm.
understanding that, I do know these platforms and what happens if you're chasing numbers, but if you're looking to just deliver great content and have passion for it, this is the time. And it's people that are in this journey that make that connection. Because I can listen and I can tell, usually I think with a heart from doing this for so long, it's like, yo, this person is really with it and they're having fun. Just that whole concept, like, I learned this in broadcast. You can hear a smile.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
if you hear that smile, you want to connect to that smile. And I want to stay in that story. I want to be intimately connected. And we can get a lot more depth about it than, celebrity slept with what celebrity or who's suing who or whatever. And it's a space and place for that too. But it's some community stories that can exist and get uplifted as well.
Oh yeah, and it brings us back to what we have, that we don't have to look outside. We have lost our identity once integration happened, how much of our own resources and sustenance and sustainability was happening inside of our communities. Well, we didn't have the opportunity to look outside. So everything was created and built from us. And we have lost that so much. And it is what it is. This is 2025. We're not going there.
Mhm.
But to your point, this reminds us, even the stories that you're being told about the pig bank and stuff like
Mhm.
that, that reminds us, oh yeah, we know how to do
Yeah.
things, how to create and build community and work with one another. We truly do know how to work with one another. We do know how to build something from nothing and do it together. And so I just think it's so important that platforms and podcasts and then initiatives that get built from this, because when you started this, the vision was talking, sharing
Yeah.
stories, and then
Yeah.
look what's come from it because you started this.
Yeah. And I believe the in person and events was a manifestation that I felt needed to happen. Is like, we like touching stuff and feeling stuff as black folks too, but it's whatever your journey is.
That's it.
Going on this, if you're passionate about it, it's going to be so many lessons. Like, in the airport from Afros and Audio, I forget the sister's name, but she has a podcast about being a survivor of cancer and being a cancer doula.
Yeah.
So it was just so cool because I didn't even know the concept of that. And knowing what a doula is just in so many different things in life, but what that is, and just understanding that, like, okay, how cancer impacts a family is so signature.
Hmm.
To know that somebody to open up and be present about that journey, that is like so dope. And knowing you're seeing it from a black lens, as we can uplift medical apartheid any day, and just know that the medical journey, like any institutional journey, is going to be different for
Hmm.
us as black people. Back
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
the design of this is for white men with property and businesses, and we're not that. So knowing that something of that arc, okay, take a little bit of this, take a little bit of that to the side, and you're gonna need to have this, and this is from us. So
Hmm.
something like that is just so foundational to know it exists. And what Talea is doing, I know is happening in other spaces. So I will hope that that person that's on the fence and thinking like, I don't know how people are going to respond to this. It's an audience. You just got to
Yeah,
connect to your audience.
absolutely.
And maybe your audience isn't the person that's having the sexy red debate. They're this other group, you know
Hmm.
what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Or the D-Lo the boss man debate, they're this other group, and that exists too, but that's in its own space and scope, and usually presented in a way that is a offering that I guess for a lack of a better term, is easier to be monetized.
Hmm. Yeah, man, this has been such a great conversation, and I couldn't agree with you more. I believe that any experience that exists gets to be represented, right? And there's a lid for every pot. So do it. Get your
Yeah.
story out there. Get the story of the people that matter to you out there because it's important. And as we've both spoken about, this is us laying our living record and then archiving it. There
Mm.
is no miscommunication of who Khary is, what he stands for. We can't misrepresent that because you're saying it on the mic. You're
Yeah.
doing it with the work. And so that's what makes this medium so liberating, but also so imperative to this time. And when I say to this time, from the time you started to now and into the future, let's keep this going. That's why we do an Afros in audio. We need
I
to
love
increase our voices in
it.
this marketplace. This is the one place we can do it, where those barriers, those steel doors, they don't exist to do this part.
In that music, I don't know if you come from that music history like me, but we kept hearing that like, okay, wow, it seems like blank CDs are catching up to regular CD sales. And then it flipped to where more blank CDs were being sold than regular CDs. Then it flipped to like, okay, people aren't even necessarily buying music. Then we see music stores close, which I've worked at a music store, one of my favorite jobs. And now it became like, okay, the barriers of entry have dropped, which opens up so many more options of what music looks like and what that music experience is. So now artists are creating experiences that we never thought would exist. And there's definitely a lot of artists that are upset saying, like, oh man, I don't know if people even buy tickets. But then it's a different intimate journey of other artists. So it'll be the same venue where you may see an artist is top of mind, like Wiz Khalifa. Wiz Khalifa's audience is something that, boy, they have a connection to Wiz or Currency or J. Cole. Or a Summer Walker. Like it's certain artists that have these deep connections. And I
Mhm,
believe podcasts go a step further if you're willing to go there and take that risk because we're going on this journey together. I've listened to some content creators where it's like, damn near, I feel like they my friend
mhm.
because that's the relationship that does exist.
Yeah,
And getting introduced to these different ways of looking at things grounds different things
yeah.
as it's going to be so many more moments and just the idea of even how I looked at media before of news and information. I think that those years are gone. I think the idea of something happening and thinking to myself, oh man, let me turn on the news. Now, when something happens, I'm thinking, hmm, I wonder what this content creator has to
Yeah.
say. Something. Okay, what is Revolutionary Black Network saying in reference to this political concept?
Mhm,
Okay, they're not necessarily the best voice when it comes to black folks from the perspective of what's happening in Gaza, but what's Mark Lamont Hill saying? Like, that's what's happening in the space of content creation.
yeah,
And it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm just going to be married to them. When someone else presents himself with a different nuance and perspective, I'm going to be interested in that
yeah,
perspective as well.
yeah.
So that's where we're at right now. It's like the lunchroom in high school has got so much larger and there's so many cool tables to sit at. It's what table you want to sit at in
There you
reference to
go.
what's happening.
In 2019, we talked about the first conference, how podcasting was like early hip hop.
Yeah,
A lot of people, and you go further back
yeah.
where you don't even know this is going to take off. Is it what's going to happen with it? Will mainstream catch on? And yep. And to your point, no record labels. We don't need any handlers anymore to create. And so that has presented an opportunity. And again, podcasting is a major player in that independent underground opportunity to just rock out and do whatever the fuck you want to do. And that makes it superior, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's definitely the freedom. And just like with music, as the barriers of entry drop, it's a happy medium between both. But the freedom of this,
Yeah.
I remember my project manager that's been with me the longest for like so many of the projects I do with the marketing firm and Detroit is different. Suzanne stepped to me and said, I don't know what you're doing. That was early on in 2014. And she pulled me to the side around 2017 and she was like, wow, you actually turned this into making money. And I was like, I wasn't even really thinking from that lens, but I have monetized this because back to the capacity of people wanted the time and people want to access themselves. And it's like, yeah, we can do this. And they're like, we're going to pay you because we want you to take this serious. That's how a lot of these opportunities happen for my journey. And I think that it's not mutually exclusive. I do believe it's so many things that can be done. And I speak to money because I look at money as that same currency that buys you time. But you may not be seeking money. You may be seeking something else. You can get a gateway to so much. So many people just recently during the campaign were meeting with Kamala Harris and other people, like, getting content created with her, like that you just never would expect. Like, and podcasters with maybe, let's say, all of sometimes they'll get 500 watches on their YouTube show. Like it was happening here in Detroit, all because of the time and the moment and what was happening and what you were connected to. Because you were a trusted voice to those people that had access to what was happening
Hmm.
with Kamala Harris coming through the city of Detroit, looking to stomp the ground. Now I'm uplifting that, but it's so many other scenarios like that. Clarissa Shields was doing an open gym for the fight she has coming up in Flint, Michigan next month. And I'm invited. So I sent to some of the other podcasters I know. I don't know if they're going to take advantage of it, but that puts you in, as far as I'm concerned, a room with the greatest woman boxer of all time to ask some questions to
Yep.
specifically get content created around what she's doing.
Yeah.
And that's I I couldn't have fathomed something like that happening when I started this. You know what I'm saying? I just didn't see it. I mean, I can only imagine how many emails and inboxes you get from different media opportunities that you're like, okay, I don't really have time or capacity,
Yeah.
but let me
Yeah.
shoot this to this other person. They may want to take something up from there. And then you meet that person and it becomes another opportunity and another
That's
opportunity
it.
and so forth and
Hmm.
so on.
Yeah, man. It's so important. And I do believe that podcasting is going to change the media game. It already has. But again, we are still evolving in so many ways. And the more we release the idea of what it's supposed to look like and simply create whatever is being downloaded to say, why don't you do this? Why don't you try it this way? The more this is going to simply open up and become so much greater than we can even imagine right now. And I'm really looking forward to that. And where I know it's going to come from is from people that look like me and you and other diverse creatives, whether it's skin color, gender identity, expression, knowledge, philosophies, whatever it looks like. That's how this is going to break wide open, is that more people represent who they are and put it out there. That's how you break down barriers between one another.
Yeah, as you speak of that, fresh on my mind like a lot of people, and I was trying to see it when it was in theaters, but the Luther Vandross documentary that CNN aired, and a lot of people are still talking about, Luther, love Luther. Um,
Same.
and I think it's similar to that same space of a person that really is turning over all the stones in this content creation journey. If you're a producer, be an engineer. If you're an engineer, look at being a person that production to get guest acquisitions. Look at setting up a live podcast. If you can learn the arc of a lot of different lenses of seeing this, it's only going to strengthen you.
Yeah.
And it's going to be so many more opportunities. Back to, like you say, this is unprecedented. I don't know anybody that's had that broadcast experience. You walk into a radio station, especially like, let's say like 95. I mean, you was in DC, like Russ Parr, I assume in like 1998, it was probably a staff with that radio show itself of probably like 30 people doing all these different things. A lot of the definitions of the jobs, the titles, the roles, haven't even been defined yet in podcasting. You can be the person to define that. Get your niche, figure that out. Okay, I'm the person that can figure out how we can do a podcast on a cruise. I'm the person that figures out how to get the equipment onto the cruise that can be captured. I'm the person that figures out, and I'm just using this as an example, like all of this is unprecedented. We're in uncharted waters.
Yes.
So much creativity that can be created. You don't necessarily have to stick to a formula that you see presented for you, because the format you see presented for you is only following what they've seen as successful.
Yep. and that ain't no way to live, in my opinion.
No, no.
so so we gonna wrap this up, man. I so appreciate this conversation. Yeah, this has been one of the longest, and that's just because I so have enjoyed this conversation. So I'm going to ask you two more questions because I think they're important, just to make sure that you continue to promote and share what you're up to. And then, of course, let people know where to find you and listen to the podcast. So, as you launch, and this is something that you wanted to talk about, your new live stream show on Black
Yeah.
community organizing, what are you most excited about exploring in this new format?
As much as I've learned in podcasting and Detroit is different, it's Black community organizing that I'm doing. So many lessons I've learned. And when I search the internet, I don't see a lot of tools that share these stories because there's certain things that are just unique to the Black experience that a cleanup day on the block of Black people, that's going to look different. You know what I'm saying? That's probably going to look a whole lot more like a barbecue where
Oh,
we're going to say, hey, for the barbecue, we got to clean this up. You know what I'm saying? So it's going to be different things like that. And then when we have the barbecue, the other part of it, you can't just say barbecue. You got to get the person that's the best cook in the neighborhood to help you with that.
it's got to be a whole ass experience.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about what that looks like and how
Hmm.
to get that buy-in and how to, work with the neighbors, settle it down, and we're going to have some fun. So I really want to tell those stories that I've learned over the years in that because it's so much information and I don't see any courses in this. I don't see a lot of content online in this, but I do see it so many places I go. And I want to talk to a lot of the other people that have been doing this work. And it's not a lot of platforms for them to share these experiences. Hence, I want to create one.
Nice, man. That's how you do it. If it's to be, it's up to me. That's my motto. So when you think about legacy and you think about what the work you have done, what Detroit is different, and I'm talking past, present, and possibly future. If you had one sentence to give about legacy, what would it be?
Mm, that's deep. I would say the legacy of Detroit is different is, I'm going to use the same word in it, legacy Black Detroit in media and events.
All right. Respect. I love it, man.
Thank you.
So tell people how they can listen to the podcast, check out the other initiatives you have, and find you on social media and your website.
Okay, I wish I had the air horn. So, all right. So, DetroitisDifferent.com. You can go to YouTube and look up Detroit is Different, Facebook Detroit is Different, Instagram Detroit is Different. These are the spaces where Detroit is Different is. Podcast Association, I'm Khary Frazier, KharyFrazier. In most places and spaces, I believe that's me on LinkedIn and all the other stuff, but you just never know. You could be talking to some Russian bot or something, but probably you're talking to me, right? And that's the way to connect. Info at DetroitisDifferent.com or my name, Khary Frazier at DetroitisDifferent.com. Reach out to me. I love to collaborate. And if it's not even just collaboration, if you would like me to give an opinion, I'll listen to a show. It may take a minute. I'll listen to your show and I could give what my opinion is and how I would approach it if you'd appreciate it. I welcome your opinion about some of the things that I'm doing. And let's get creative.
Nice, man. Any upcoming initiatives? Like when is the next Collard Greens Cookoff?
So the month of February throughout Detroit, I'm doing screenings of A Debt Owed, Not a Handout. It is a video essay about the story of three Detroiters that were key in the reparations movement. That's Congressman John Conyers. That is Councilwoman Joanne Watson, my godmother, and also Reparations Ray Jenkins, a community organizer. So I'm doing a lot of screenings of that in February. In March, we will be picking up with a George Floyd moment. That'll be 2 of 3 in a series of different community discussions. And because that's Women's History Month, we're going to have some young women platform in video to talk to some older women about solutions that we can have commitments to about what that moment in time was for people. And also, we're going to execute My Mom's My First Fan. Last year, the NFL draft took place in the city of Detroit. and we gathered a collection of NFL moms to talk to Little League moms about lessons they learned about getting their sons through the journey of the NFL. So you can go to Detroit is Different right now, like my bus. So Gladys Bettis, Jerome Bettis's mom is a big part of that. And you can just listen to the full Detroit is Different interview I have with her. But that platform on My Mom's My First Fan was really cool. Herman Moore showed up with his mother. It was a fun event and a relationship that was built between the NFL Pro Moms Association and Detroit is Different moving forward, because that's Women's History Month too. And back to the Collard Green Cookoff, that's June. So June, that Saturday of Juneteenth, we're going to have playoff round 1 of the Collard Green Cookoff that may expand to some other cities. And then the championship round will be Saturday, June 20th. And the championship will be Thursday, August 20th. And we always do My Natural Hair Show. It's like a week after the Afros and Audio Conference. So that'll be the October 25th, last Saturday in October. And we always close out December 30th with State Like Detroit. And I'm sure it'll be other stuff that pops up on the map too.
Yeah, man, you're my kind of creative. You're doing a damn thing, and I respect it so much. Salute,
Thank you.
brother. I know you are making a huge impact in so many ways, and long live the chief. I want you to
Oh man.
continue because it's so important what you're doing and who you are, and what you're bringing to not just Detroit. This is an example for a lot of people and a lot of spaces and places, and so I just salute you, brother. I really do.
All right. Well, I definitely welcome everyone that's listening. Thank you so much. And we want to get some more cities on board with this Collard Green Cook-Off. It may not be this year, but even as things move, because it's another idea and movement connected to that that's going to grow. Plus, yeah, yo, you from DC. I don't want y'all cheating, putting mambo sauce in the collard greens. We got
We're gonna get that mama sauce somewhere on the plate.
it's like they
Trust me on
cheap. They cheap. They using gimmicks.
yeah, yeah, yeah. We getting on it somewhere on the plate. But yeah, man, this has been great. And any way that I can collaborate with you, Afros and Audio can collaborate with you, myself personally, I'm here for it. I'm definitely getting down to Detroit for something. One of them
Let's
things,
do it.
two of them things, I'm getting there for. So I'm really looking forward to continue our connection, brother. And thank you so much for taking the time for this conversation. And that's it.
Respect. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.